Now let's review working with percents. So we have three definitions here first. Number one, n%, written with the percent symbol like that you've seen before, is the number n divided by 100. So this is the number that we normally work with in mathematical formulas. When that formula requires a percent, we really work with n over 100. We don't put the actual percent number in. We'll talk about that down here in a second. n% of the number c is the quantity n over 100 times c. So that's how you calculate n% of a number c. And the percent that a number a is of the number b is given by a divided by b times 100%. This will turn it into a percent right here when you multiply by 100. Now down here is what I was talking about with respect to number 1. When you're working with n% in calculations and mathematical formulas, so if you have a formula that requires you to input a percent into it, you use n divided by 100. You don't use the actual percent. So, for example, if you have a 6.5%, that's a loan rate or something like that. You use the number 0.065, which is 6.5 over 100, right? That's equal to 0.065. You move the decimal place 2 positions to the left when you divide by 100. So this is the number that you actually input into any mathematical formulas that are required. Now you have to be careful because some applications and Excel macros that you might run across may be designed to accept 6.5 as an input instead of 0.065. You have to be careful with that. So in the formula, it might take your input and divide that by 100, and so somewhere in the formula, in the calculation, it will do this for you automatically. So you have to be careful. Let's take a look at a few examples. So let's rewrite 10% in its fraction form. Well, that would simply be 10 divided by 100, or 1/10, or 0.1. So that's the number that you would input into any mathematical formula if you had to input 10% into it. Rewrite 234% in fraction form. Well, that would be 234 divided by 100. And that, that does reduce as 117 over 50. That's in its reduced form. Or we could going back here, that's actually in decimal form, 2.34. Let's take a look at this. Rewrite 3/4 as a percent. Well, you would simply multiply that by 100, so it would be 3/4 times 100%. 3/4 is 0.75. And so then you just move this decimal 2 positions to the right because you're multiplying by 100, and that would be 75%. Let's rewrite 2/5 as a percent. Well, that same thing. 2/5 times 100%. That's going to be 2 divided by 5 is 0.4 times 100%. And so that is 40%. Let's rewrite 0.35 repeating as a percent and round to the second decimal place. Well, okay, so we would multiply this by 100. So 0.35 repeating like that. Remember, that is just 0.353535 like that, and it just keeps going. So So I'm going to have to move over here. So what we get then is 0.35 repeating like that times 100% is equal to 35.3535, and it keeps going like that, percent, and that rounds to 35.35%. Just rounding that to the second decimal place. Notice how the third decimal place here is a 3, so we would round that to 35.35. That 5 right there would stay fixed, and then we just throw away that part. All right. Let's take a look at a few more examples. Let's evaluate 6% of 50. Well, we're going to have to take 6 over 100 times 50. That's all it is. Or realizing that 6 over 100 is 0.06, and then multiply that by 50. So just do that on your calculator, and you should get 3 back. So 6% of 50 is 3. 25% of 300, same procedure, 25 over 100 times 300, or just recognizing that that's the same as 0.25 times 300. Evaluate that on a calculator and you'll get 75. That makes sense because 4 times 75 gives you 300 back. 15 is what percent of 50? If you want to try these on your own, you can. 15 is, we would evaluate that as 15 divided by 50, and then to turn that into a percent, we would multiply by 100%, and that is going to equal 30%. Let's just verify that one on our calculator. If you pull up put it right here. So if we evaluate 15, so 15 divided by 50 times 100, and yes, 30. Let's take a look at this one. 23 is what percent of 120? Why don't you try that one? So that would be 23 over 120 times 100%. And let's do that on our calculator. So 23 divided by 120 times 100. And we get back, let's round that to 2 decimal places, 19.17%. So 23 is 19.17% of 120. Let's look at this one. 25% of what number is 80? Well, now we're going to actually have to do a little algebra here. So let's let x be the number that we're looking for. So what we want then is 25 over 100 times the number x should equal 80. That's what we want. We want to solve for that number x. Now this is the same as writing 0.25 times x equals 80. Now we have to solve for that number x right here. So this is what we have to solve for. So what we want to do now is we want to get rid of this 0.25 on this side of the equation, and we want to, that will isolate the x then on the left hand side. So we will divide both sides of the equation by 0.25. Notice then how these 0.25s cancel, and that will leave an x on the left-hand side, so we'll get x equals 80 divided by 0.25. Let's evaluate that on our calculator. So 80 divided by 0.25, and we get 320. So x equals 320. And that's our answer. So 25% of 320 is 80. And you might have recognized that right away. You don't necessarily need to do this algebra because you could recognize, well, 25%, that's 1/4. And so what I want is I want 80. So our answer is going to be 80 times 4, right? And 80 times 4 is 320. Okay, so you may have thought of it like that, which is fine. Let's look at this one. So a bookstore makes 25% profit on each book it sells. If a book sells for $19.95, find the approximate profit made by the book. Well, so we're asking, in other words, we're asking for 25% of $19.95. That's going to be our profit. So our answer is going to be 25 over 100, or 0.25 times 19.95. So 0.25 times 19.95, not 19 over. And let's evaluate that on our calculator. So 0.25 times 19.95. $4, and let's round that to $4.99. Which makes sense because $19.95 is pretty close to $20, right? 25% is 1/4 of the amount you're looking for, and so 20 divided by 4 is $5. So very close to $5. Now let's look at percent increase and decrease. So if a value A, so we have a starting value A, maybe that's revenue or income of a company, is increased or decreased to the value B, then the percent increase or decrease is given by the percent P, that the amount of the increase or decrease is of the starting value A. So in other words, you start with a value A, you go to the value B. The difference is going to be B minus A. That's the amount of your increase or decrease. And then you want to find the percent that this quantity is of your starting value A. That's going to be your percent increase or decrease. So in other words, we're asking what percent is B minus A? What percent is that of the starting value A? So from our definitions that we had earlier, it's going to be this. So that's going to be your percent increase or decrease. You just look at B minus A divided by A. Now take note of this. If P is positive, then we say A has increased by P% to B. So in other words, the B minus A is a positive number. So you have an increase from A to B. On the other hand, if P comes out to be negative, then we say A has decreased by the absolute value of P% to B. This absolute value means that you just make P a positive number. So if P is, for example, if P is negative 25%, the absolute value of P will be positive 25%. So you just have to be careful of this. We'll look at an example down here in a second. So let's take a look at this. The value 75 is increased to 100. Calculate the percent increase. All right, so using our formula up here, we would evaluate 100 minus 75. That's the amount of change from 75 to 100. We would divide that by the original amount we had, 75, and then multiply by 100. So this is going to be 25 divided by 75 times 100%. Should have a percent over here. And that is going to equal, if you evaluate 25 over 75, that's 1/3, right? So you're going to get 33.33 round. I'll just round to the second decimal place percent. That's what you would get. You can, just verify that on a calculator. (25) divided by 75 times 100. And there you go, 33.3 repeating percent, or rounding to the second decimal place, 33.33%. Let's look at this example. Sales for a wholesale shoppers club increased last year from 25 billion to 28.5 billion. Evaluate the percent increase. So, same procedure. We want to look at divided by our starting value of 25, and then just multiply that by 100%. And let's get out our calculators. Now, we have to use parentheses, so it'll be parenthesis 28.5 minus 25. Of course, that's 3.5 divided by 25 times 100. And we get 14%. So that's a 14% increase. Let's look at this one. From 2007, 2008 to 2008-2009, corn production in the U.S. decreased from 13 billion bushels to 12 billion. Evaluate the percent decrease. All right, so now our starting value A is 13, and our ending value B is 12. So we evaluate 12 minus 13 divided by our starting value of 13, and then just multiply that by 100%. And let's see, that is going to be 12 minus 13 is, of course, -1, divided by 13 times 100. And we get negative, rounding to 2 decimal places, -7.69%. Or we would say a 7.69% decrease. And that would be our answer. All right. So, and that is all we have to do with our review of dealing with percents and percent increase and decrease.